Hey everyone, you're listening to the TEN7 Podcast, where we get together every fortnight, and sometimes more often, to talk about technology, business, and the humans in it. I'm your host, Ivan Stegic. In this episode of the podcast, Drew Gorton, Director of Developer Relations at Pantheon. Drew's been involved with the web in some capacity, going back to 1996 while teaching English in Japan. He started Gorton Studios here in Minneapolis in 2001. And then in 2015, their product, NodeSquirrel, was acquired by Pantheon, where he now leads their developer relations team. I'm so glad to be able to call him a colleague, a fellow Drupaler, and a friend. Drew, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the podcast.
Wow, it's my honor as well. You dug into the history vault for that one. I don't think I have a Wikipedia page. How did you come up with all of that?
It's all true. It's all true. Well, I kind of looked at your LinkedIn profile, to be honest.
Oh, right. I suppose that probably has some information on it. All right.
Well, let's start at the beginning. Beginning of Drew Gorton. So, where did you grow up?
I grew up in southeast Wisconsin, so between Milwaukee and Chicago. It's a town called Racine, and it's about 80, 90, 100,000, somewhere in there. My parents still live in the house I grew up in, and I was there through high school. And that's kind of poignant for me because after, as we've talked about this before, but I now have two high school age children, one of whom is a senior this year. And I'm very aware of the fact that after I left for college, I never went back home again to live. And this is one of the things, like, as a parent who enjoys his adult sons, realizing like, oh, wait, I might have a limited amount of time with them left. But yeah, I came up here into the Minneapolis area for school. And then after graduating, lived abroad for a while, did some other things, but then came back and settled down. I've basically been in Minneapolis for 20-ish years. And doing web and Drupal things for much of it.
I know how you feel with the adult kids and leaving home. And it's interesting to think that once you leave, it's still in your brain somehow, but you never really think about going back. And now the opposite is happening. Yeah. And so, yeah, it really teaches you to cherish those moments with those adult kids. On your LinkedIn profile, it said you went to the Prairie School. What is the Prairie School?
Wow, you really did dig. Yeah, that was the high school I graduated from, Racine. So Racine is big enough to have a few high schools. I think there are 3 of them. Prairie is a college prep school. So it was actually a really good change for me. I went to where I grew up. Actually, was kind of on a boundary that kept changing. So I never went to a school for more than 2 years before transferring over to Prairie. And as a kid, I was actually not terribly well adjusted to social niceties. I was just, I didn't get other kids. And so basically, that means that and the frequent switching of schools meant I was a pretty isolated kid, and I was doing really badly in school. Like, despite having all sorts of potential and doing well on standardized tests and things like that, I was kind of failing out and a bit of a discipline problem. And so my parents decided that change was needed, and they packed me off to the college prep school, and it was a pretty fantastic change. I'm really glad they did that. I don't know what bridge I'd be living under if I hadn't had a big change there. Who knows? Probably not a bridge, but yeah, it was a good change for me. So Prairie is a small liberal art, or a small college prep school in Racine. So I graduated a class of 30-ish kids.
You're a liberal arts graduate. You started a web company. You sold a product company. Now you lead a group of engineers. Tell me about your time at St. Olaf. What did you come out thinking you would actually be doing?
So I went to college thinking I was going to become an architect, and was intent on studying math and physics as an undergrad, and then going and doing architecture as a combination of, well, essentially postgrad. And by the end of my freshman year, I was convinced that physics sucked. And looking back, I'm aware now that that was just a really a couple of bad profs, basically. Like, the teaching was not great, and at the time, I just started to. At the time, what I knew was, this is not interesting. I don't know why I used to like this. It's just really boring. And these other classes that I'm taking are pretty exciting and interesting, and I'm really getting into them. And that was enough to push me out of physics. And then that started a slow evolution that actually my senior year ended with me totally flipping my majors around to be Spanish and religion, with effectively a minor in math. I needed like 2 more classes to have like a triple major, but I decided not to kill myself. And that was part of what I was actually up to. I kept the math major all the way through because I thought basically, well, math is employable somehow, probably, right? I don't think I can pull that off with a philosophy degree. And in my senior year, I just decided, no, it's fine. I was in a seminar about fractal and chaos theory, which I really enjoyed, but it didn't have a lot to do with bookkeeping. I just decided that, you know what, if I'm really holding on to this major as an attempt to be employable, I'm about 4 semesters past the point where any business is going to care about this. And so I'll just go do the things I'm having fun with. And so I ended up with the philosophy of religion focus or degree, and Spanish. And Spanish was something that I acquired, or the love of Spanish happened actually also from my time at Prairie is where it started. My senior year at Prairie, I had a friend who was an exchange student, and I actually got to be really good friends with him. And at the end of my senior year, I actually went to visit him in Spain for about a month, and it totally changed. It was a really impactful visit, and it really turned Spanish from being a class that I would joke around in and not really do very well in high school to something that I really, really enjoyed, because I was having a chance to interact with people in this hitherto just like kind of purposeless thing in my mind. But all of a sudden it opened up the ability to communicate with the family and the friends and all of the people. And that when I started college, then I knew that I actually wanted to continue doing Spanish and maybe study abroad. And I did all of those things. And I did it enough that a major was like right there. As I was contemplating, what do I want to do? What do I want to, I need to graduate soon. What are the majors I want to do? And Spanish was one of the choices.
So are you bilingual or trilingual? Because I know you taught English in Japan, and we've talked about Japan in the past, you and I, but I don't recall.
So those are tricky things to claim. My English is better than both of them. My Spanish is pretty good. At one point in time, I would have been able to have a conversation like this at a natural speed in Spanish. And I possibly could still do that, although I'm sure there'd be words I'd search for. And every so often I get into a situation where I do speak Spanish, and that happens. But I can usually just explain around it and be like, what's the word for forehead? The thing that's above your eyes and below your hair. What's that thing called? I can say those kinds of things. My Japanese used to be quite good as well. Went from no Japanese on arrival in Japan to being able to do things like lease a car and sign an agreement, and certainly, obviously, live there. We were there for 3 years and just live in a professional society and do all the things that you need to do to survive and thrive in a different environment. But my written and reading of Japanese is not nearly as good. Japanese is a hard language to truly master. There's a ranking system, like an official Japanese government, like your level of proficiency in Japanese, and it's got 4 levels. And wow, I think I'm a 3. 1 is like university professor, like can really be like incredibly articulate and read and write. And a lot of the focus is on reading and writing. And basically my level of Japanese is conversational. Like, this person can live in Japan and read a newspaper article and converse but they're not going to write a paper like a research paper in Japanese would have been out of my grip at the time. And like nowadays, I look back, I've got notes that I would take in Japanese every so often. Actually, we moved houses like 2 or 3 years ago, and I had occasion to look back and discover a notebook that I had written, and to see your own handwriting and be like, what in God's name was it? Like all the scribbles and stuff. I'm like, oh man. I mean, I obviously knew this at one point in time, but I really have to struggle to figure out what I wrote down. Like recipes, for example, like talking with friends, got recipes. Like, wow, okay, is that chicken or is that pork or what is that? Yeah.
It must have been fascinating to immerse yourself in a completely unknown culture and society, and then have to learn how to swim and function.
It was an awesome opportunity and a real. It definitely shaped a lot of who I am today. I know that for a fact. It's hard to know exactly how that happened. Like to isolate the specific things, but I know that at the point at which I left for Japan, I had at that point in time lived in Spain, spent basically a year in Spain. And so had some level of familiarity with, okay, it's different, but it's also kind of the same. We're all just people. We like to eat food. Some people are nice, some people aren't. Going to Japan was an additional level of that. Like between Spain and Europe in general and the United States, there's a lot of shared cultural kinds of influences. So historically, Europe is dominated by Christianity, for example. A lot of that is here present in the United States. And so there are like just cultural touch points and understandings and such that are Judeo-Christian in background. Whereas you go to Japan and it's very different. You don't have that. That's a completely different worldview. At the same time, we all like to eat. Some people are nice, some people are less nice, some people are welcoming of strangers, some people less so. Like there are a lot of commonalities again, but there was enough differences that it also just gave me a cleaner understanding of what it is to be human in a way that you see through a few more layers and realize just how much each of us is a product of the stories we tell and the civilizations we celebrate and the histories that we remember and share.
And you taught English there, and you weren't there alone, were you?
That's right. Yes, I was there for 3 years. I taught English in a high school. I was fortunate to be in a high school that was considered one of the better high schools in the area, and so I had kids who were motivated to learn and engaged in the classroom, and that's a great situation to be in as a teacher. But then I was there with my wife as well. So we had both lived individually, separately in different countries, and got married soon after college. I lived in Spain. She lived in at the time, Czechoslovakia, but currently Czech Republic. We had these amazing experiences, and we felt, this is, I learned a lot when I was there. You learned a lot when you were there. You have all these stories. I have all these stories. What if we did something together? And about a year after being married, both of us were in jobs that were, paying the rent, but not terribly interesting. And we decided, well, now's the time to do it. And we actually looked to Latin America primarily as the place to go. Her family had, she's got 4 brothers and sisters, so 5 of them total. They had all been born in either Venezuela or Mexico because her parents had lived there for, I think, 17 years or 20 years, a long time in the combination of the 2 different countries as American expats. And so she grew up with all the stories of Mexico and Venezuela and some light Spanish being spoken in the house and used for household terms. And so there's, again, with both of us, there was a touchdown to Spanish. However, Latin America was not a place that either of us had lived before. And we decided that, let's go figure out what we can do. Latin America would be new for both of us, but also combine, it feels like it's also like something nearby for both of us. And we ended up looking around at these things and applied to something called the JET program, Japanese Exchange Teaching Program, on a fluke. Basically, someone said like, oh, well, hey, while you're looking at things international, there's this one thing you could fill out the paperwork. And we're like, Japan? That's weird. Okay, well, all right, it'll be good for the experience, right? And so we filled out the paperwork, wrote the essays, whatever the things were, and then kind of forgot about it. And like 2 or 3 months later, they followed up with us. We got a letter. It was like, hey, I really loved your applications. You should come to Chicago to interview at the consulate. And we're like, Japan, Chicago? I don't want to go to Chicago. Wait. And we're like, your sister is in Chicago. She's kind of fun. We can go and hang out with her. And like, we'll spend the weekend. We'll do that. And then, hey, we'll do this thing. And then we'll just come back, whatever. We're like, it'll be a good experience. And so then we went to the consulate. We had this fun weekend. And again, like 2 or 3 months later, we kind of forgot about it. And then they wrote and they said, we would like to send you to Japan. And we're like, really? And then we just, again, kind of went with it. We're like, well, okay, can't be that bad, right? Should be fun. We can do anything for a year, right? So we went for a 1-year contract, and then it was renewable up to 3 years, and we did that and went through for 3 years. 3 years turned into being a natural break point, just because of the way the visa system works. We could have stayed longer, but it would have required a little bit. It was just, again, like a natural end point. And we looked around and saw other expatriates there, and we saw that it was basically 3 years. There seemed to be another cutoff at 7 years, and then seemed to be a cutoff at, then you're there for life. And we're kind of thinking about maybe start a family and, things like that. And so it was a hard decision at the time, but it was also a good decision. So we came back and been in Minneapolis basically since.
While you were in Japan, were you thinking about or involved in the tech scene in any way, or did that come after you got back to the United States?
It started in Japan, actually. Well, and I remember, so I graduated from college in '94, and one of the guys I lived with at the time was actually in '94, got really excited about the web. And he told me, he took me aside. He's like, hey, Drew, I think you'd really like this. His name is Ted. He's a successful electrical engineer. He helps design chips these days. He took me aside and he's like, Drew, I think you'd really like this. He showed me the screen. He was like, hey, look at this. You can find things all around the world. And I remember being totally not impressed. I was like, Ted, that's super nerdy. Let's go have a beer. And thinking this is just whatever. We're playing cards. Come on, join us. And then, I think I talked him into it. He was like, no, you'd really like this. And I was like, I'm sure I would. Have a beer. And then I went and lived in Japan, and that was an isolating experience. And at the same time, so that was 95 to 98. At the same time, the web was starting to grow. And actually in probably 96, I realized, here, I'm using email to keep in touch with my family. I'm doing, these things are emergent and real and new patterns. I started wanting to do, give those same opportunities to my kids, the kids I was teaching. And so I started setting up email exchanges with students who are also learning English in different countries. So Scandinavia. And then also we ended up with kids in Northern Ireland that we were communicating with, who obviously spoke English quite well. And then the next extension of that was, hey, what if we could create little pages about ourselves and post a picture and put something together and use that and just get a little bit more of a sense for who these other people are. And so we started doing that back and forth again with the students in these different countries. It was just transformational. It was I could see the same change happen for my students that happened for me when I lived in Spain. This is real. I'm talking to someone who's actually very real. Mm-hmm. I see their face. I see that person. They're really cute. I want to communicate with that person and put a little extra effort into it. And now English was not a subject you needed to take to pass a test in order to get into a good university. It was those things, yes, but also actually this really cool thing you could learn in order to communicate with somebody impossibly far away. And, the world has really shrunk a lot in the last 20 years. Talking about this now, it sounds incredibly old-timery in many ways. My kids don't have a sense for this at all. But at the time, it was just really eye-opening to me. And I knew that I wanted to be involved with this technology basically right away. It was well, I'm teaching here. This is good. When I came back, it's what I knew I wanted to be involved with web stuff, what that meant, how you do that, I didn't know. But I saw it as a technology that was fundamentally transforming the world. And it was powerful, and there are philosophically a number of things that were really attractive to me. So the freedom to interact with people around the world with regardless of like what you look like, what language you might speak, although you'll need at least a common one, what your belief structure is, your gender, all all of those things can be stripped away and you can interact with folks everywhere. That's transformative. And it's still, we're not done yet. We're still in the early days of the web, but it is a fundamental building block in building a world culture, basically. Like, this is still transforming the way that we think and identify ourselves. While there are all sorts of instances of people doing not so great things with these tools, fundamentally, I think it continues to be a transformative power for the good.
I agree with that, and I hope it continues to do that. It's always been an ideal. I remember when the web started and I was in high school and in South Africa, and we were completely isolated, and we just started becoming reintegrated into the world, and at the same time the internet was starting to connect us. And I remember being overjoyed with the idea that I could connect on this level playing field with everybody else. And it's, I still believe, and I think you do too, that this is something that will transform our world and our culture. And it's had a little bit of bad press lately, the last few years.
It has. Yeah.
But I think we both still believe in the ideal that maybe this is just a bump in the road.
Yeah. Well, I think I do believe that. And I think it was perhaps a naive sort of like my own, like, wow, I'm connecting with people. But there are many people who grow up and are in environments that push them towards extremism and have situations that are way less privileged than mine. And regardless, so it is changing the world. We are becoming a worldwide civilization. It turns out there are a lot of people with strikingly different ideas for what good is and what should we be doing. And so there are some activities that happen in the name of, what presumably people think are the right things to do. But still fundamentally, like, we are so much more connected today, and we're starting to learn more about each other. And that's, again, not without friction, for sure. I don't know. I guess overall, fundamentally, I believe that friction is probably just a necessary part of learning about each other.
And I think as it matures and as we learn about those frictions, we can learn to adapt to them. And eventually we hope, my hope is that ultimately we evolve past all of the trouble and past all of the issues that we have. So you landed in Minneapolis, you chose Minneapolis, and you immediately founded Gorton Studios, or was there an interim period?
No, there was an interim period there. Yeah. So actually what we immediately did was, we had both earned a pretty nice salary while we were in Japan. We were able to use that to pay off student debts, which was great. Came back and had some money saved, and then had actually paid into the equivalent of Social Security in Japan. And when you leave Japan and say, thank you, I paid in Social Security. Can I have that money back? They say yes. That's very kind of them. I don't know if that other countries do that. So you file some paperwork and then you get like a nice big lump sum. So anyways, we went back. My wife's parents live in Minneapolis. We lived in their basement at low rent, and would do things like make meals together and play cards every night. But after 6 months, all of a sudden we realized the money was running short and we didn't have jobs. We knew we were going to take a while just to, let our heads clear after being abroad for so long. And then came back and, again, 6 months later, realized, we can't stay retired forever. We should do something. Which was really a bummer. Retirement was great. I liked it. So both of us actually went back to jobs we'd been doing before. At the time, for me, that meant going back to the insurance company I'd been working for, where I did tech support. And I told them, look, I'll do tech support. This is fine. I don't want to do this long term. What I really want to do is this web stuff. However, all of the docs are web documents, all of the other things. So I ended up sort of taking over internal websites, and then did that for about a year. to the point where I could legitimately call myself, all right, I'm actually pretty good with this stuff. I was troubleshooting it for other people, and again, maintaining a pretty large site without the advantages of things like PHP and other, maintaining a site by hand that had like 5,000 pages in it. That's like it was just like our internal help documentation.
Server-side includes are your friend at that point.
It could have been there, but I don't think I used them, or we used them at all. Like, it was like the header, you've got 100 docs. They've got like 5 links at the top, and you've got, somewhere along the way you copy pasted the wrong header, and now you've got like 600 docs that have got like slightly different versions of Twitter and everything else. Oh yeah, it was a beautiful way to learn that you don't manage this by hand.
Right.
So then I went from there to a web development job at a .com startup, and that lasted about a year. It was very clear. Unfortunately, I had some, really enjoyed some of the people I worked with and the work we were doing. We were doing what we were calling at the time webcasting, which was taking television feeds and putting them online using, what was it, Real
Player. Were you
Real Player? That's the one.
Real Player. Wow.
We were using Real Player, and I think the Windows Media was maybe out in some format at that point. But we used Real Player and at least one of them. And then we also had some custom stuff that allowed us to basically advance slides for recorded versions. So at the time, it was pretty, it was like a ways ahead of things. But we never had a repeat customer. It was very clear that, to me, that it was not worth what we were selling it for. Went independent, and then, I'd been moonlighting at the time, and then that just really took off. And that was, I went independent in 2001. I remember incorporating like January 2001, and essentially it worked out. Despite the fact that the .com crash and, other things happened in short succession there. But I had enough clients lined up and enough savings and other things. I mean, there were some dark years in there where it was work many long hours, and, but made it. And, the lean years were probably done within 3 or 4, and then was able to start growing a team, and had an awesome team with folks such as Lynn Winter on it. Lynn was probably with us for 8, maybe even longer years. And before that, she was a client. And I was really blessed to have an awesome team of people that were incredibly, stuck around for a long time, and just really great quality people.
Yeah, Gorton Studios existed for about 14 years. And I think you guys made some significant contributions to Drupal and to the Drupal community. Most notably, I think, Backup and Migrate, right? That's one of the top 10 modules of all time that Drupal uses. And that was something you and Ronan created. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say you wrote some of the initial code with Ronan, or Ronan wrote some of the initial code with you. Basically, this was your baby.
Yeah, it was much more Ronan's baby than mine. I contributed small bits, and like any open source thing, it started out as a scratch your own itch. We were dealing with a host at the time that gave, there was no access to the database unless you filed a support ticket. And if they weren't prompt about getting back to you, you were like, hey, I guess I can't work with the production data on, which I kind of need in order to duplicate this thing so I can build the next thing, whatever it is. And one day, while noodling this over and being really frustrated, I think Ronan and I were kind of maybe batting this around out loud, and essentially something, realized, hey, what actually does have read and write access to this database? Drupal itself. We don't need no stinking file system or filing some stinking ticket. We'll just write a thing that allows us to actually just grab all the stuff. And so the first version of Backup and Migrate was an internal tool only, and we called it DB dump. And it was really straightforward. And then it was just grab all the things, and then we added actually what we don't want is cache tables and stuff like that. And so we add exclude these things, and then over time we realized actually we've got some clients who've got all of the zip codes in the United States. And so we all right, now we need, rather than just defaulting to exclude cache. How about we give an interface to be able to exclude other tables like that? If you don't need 50 megs of zip codes or whatever it was on every single DB dump that you want, go ahead and exclude those. And so that was absolutely it. And then we realized over time, actually, I wonder, this could be a tool to go ahead and move, like it's better thought of as actually a tool to move back and forth between environments. And then we decided, we should contribute this back. I don't know if anybody else wants this thing, but maybe somebody else has a crappy situation, and then contributed it back. And it was early enough that, and enough other people had this particular pain point for ease of moving things back and forth, that it really took off. And then it became sort of a self-fulfilling, like once it's popular, and
you have to maintain it.
Yeah, you have to maintain it. You absolutely have to maintain it. But we also very much saw that as like as a way to give back, frankly. Like we at the time were working a lot with Drupal and felt like it was providing just a tremendous amount of value to us. And it was like, just trying to be a good open source citizen, basically. Like there's so much that we're getting from this platform, from this community. Here, we're going to just toss in this one little tiny thing and try and do, and we tried to toss in more than one little tiny thing. There were other things that we contributed in time and money and other things, but it was definitely a concrete example of let's try and give something back, which is probably 5% of the value if you were to like somehow quantify everything that we got out of Drupal. It would be fractional what we were devoted to giving back. Not nothing, but again, it just felt like a good citizenships kind of thing initially. And then people say appreciative things, and that becomes its own sort of reason to continue. So people say like, oh, this is an awesome module. And you're like, really? You've heard of my module? That's crazy. And then you hear that a bunch of times. You're like, oh, well, that's pretty cool. I like it when people like me. Maybe I'll keep working on it.
I remember using Backup and Migrate for the first time and being so thankful that it existed. And then I was curious, like, who made this? Where did this come from? And I went to the page and it was like, Ronan and Drew? Hold on a second. I know these guys. Wait.
they're like around here somewhere.
Yeah, it was awesome. So NodeSquirrel was like a natural extension of Backup and Migrate, right? Mm-hmm. It was another issue or another scratch that you wanted, or itch that you wanted to scratch, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Again, that had been a light discussion for many years of like, oh, we should, think about a product. Because when you're a services company, I think it's a natural. We certainly did it, and I hear others do it a lot. Like, I wonder if we could build a product. The one, it's great that we can go ahead and build clients, but we also have to find a new client. And, that gets tiresome. You sort of feel like you're, like a hamster on a wheel sort of thing. Like, we should build a product. And I think that's a common sort of thought process. And I have strong opinions about that as well. And absolutely something we could talk about. I think I gave a session at DrupalCon about this a few years ago. I think DrupalCon Barcelona, something like bridging the gap, doing products as a services company. At one point in time, Ronan actually just said, you know what? I can just do this. I'm just going to do this in my spare time. I'm just going to do it to like goof around and like see if I could build. I'm going to challenge myself with a new, something to build to see if I could build a hosted version, basically a hosted destination for databases that would be secure and offsite and something you can just rely on. And he knocked it together using Drupal. So it's obviously a Drupal module feeds it back up in Migrate. The site where you would go to find out more about it. Well, actually, there was no marketing site to start out with, but then he built the receiver on the other end, which was a Drupal site with a bunch of Drupal modules in it, including, quite a bit of stuff for, like the storing of the databases and stuff, which was custom, but a lot of the functionality, was the standard stuff. It was views for admins being able to see what, things listed, etc. And then he basically brought it in and said, you know what, I've been having a lot of fun with this and it's cool, but I don't know what to do next. And it's just basically been a pet project, but I think it might have legs. I think it might go somewhere. Would Gorton Studios like in on this? And that started off a lot of conversations like, well, that's cool. I don't want to take your baby. Like there was a lot of like sort of dance back and forth. Like, I mean, you built this thing. Are you sure? His feedback was basically, yeah, I am sure because I've done all the programming. That's fun. Now it needs like marketing and stuff. And I don't even know what that is. Like nobody's going to ever do this, I don't think. So I don't know, like those next gaps were totally opaque to him and actually, frankly, to all of us. But we knew how to maybe take a crack at it. And so he brought it back. He brought it into Gorton Studios. We had like a little charter that we formed up at the time, and we ran it as an independent company underneath the Gorton Studios, and like obviously by Gorton Studios. Managed to learn our way and sort of luck our way into a modest amount of success. It was going well, like graphs up to the right, making money, etc., which is cool as a product. Essentially to the point where it became a problem. So for me as the CEO, again, was it 2015? So probably in 2014, I realized that it was growing enough to merit real attention and time. And that was a problem. Like, okay, now we've been just doing this kind of around the edges in our spare times, spare time, quote unquote. Hadn't really made it a huge push. Like we would show up to DrupalCon, we'd have a booth, we'd do other things, but then we'd go home from DrupalCon, we'd go back to our billable work, and then maybe remember to tweet once a month or something like that. And again, it continued growing through all of that. We realized that, or I realized, or I did a lot of thinking, like either I need to hire someone to be devoted to this full time, or we need to sell this to someone who will do that same thing, or, well, I suppose the other one would have been shut down. But it's basically, I was looking between those first two more or less. Like, do we need to full-time staff this, dedicate actual money? What does that look like? We're going to, break off and, again, give it the attention it deserves for the potential that I see in it. Or I could go for the quick win and sell it to somebody and, just make gazillions of dollars. So I was kind of...
So you went for that option.
Yeah, I went for that one. Actually, I did both simultaneously. Like I really spent a lot of time planning all those things, and then at the same time actively talking to folks. And amongst the people I had an early conversation with was Zach Rosen, who's the CEO of Pantheon. Just wanted to pick his brains because Pantheon came out of an agency that had built a product, a platform, and then went on to great success. And I kind of want to know, just the balance and how did you do things, and we just started really getting into it, and we had just like an awesome conversation. It was at a Pantheon partner dinner in 2014 range. I happened to crash that dinner to hang out with some friends from Think Shout, who are a great agency based in Portland. Then I just sat at their booth, and Zach was kind of doing the rounds, like, "Hey, I'm Zach Rosen. I'm the president," going around and being sociable and doing all those working the room in a really great way. Actually, I mean, it was just a very authentic way. But sat down and I was like, "Hey, Zach, I just want to talk to you for a little bit." And we ended up talking for 3 hours, and I kind of killed his circuit of the room. And then we saw each other again, and I was like, "Wow, we're just going to keep talking. This is really cool." We talked a few more times at different events over the next 2 or 3 months where we just ended up being together, and we just said, "All right, we're going to take a couple hours. I really again, I want to pick your brains. I want to get a feel for this." And at the same time, I was really developing a sense of aha, I also think Pantheon might be a potential customer for this. And so I started to, in the back of my head thinking, all right, I might be able to sell this to these guys. That'd be pretty cool. Problem solved, get some money, and good. I'll go back to continuing this cool agency I'm running. I think what Zach was doing, it was this is an interesting guy. This product could be cool, but I'd like to have him on my team. So I think I was selling him NodeSquirrel, and he was selling me Pantheon. And it worked out. I'm happy with where we landed. Yeah, that process went through, and actually, when it first was broached, I have to give credit to my wife as well, because Zach was like, "You know what? We'd like to, we're kind of interested in buying NodeSquirrel, but I really want you to come with it. You and Ronan as well." And I actually just laughed. I was like, "I can't speak for Ronan. That's you talk to Ronan. If Ronan wants that, that's cool. But I already have it. It's got my name on it. It's called Gorton Studios. It's actually my name. I do a thing already." And I just kind of laughed. I thought, is this a negotiating technique? And it was respectful and continued the conversation. Whatever. That conversation happened to happen in San Francisco. So when I came home, I told my wife, "Hey, honey, the funniest thing happened." I was talking to Zach, and he thought they'd like to hire me too. I was like, can you believe it? That's just ridiculous. And she like had one of those moments of clarity that I remember certainly very much. She just looked me deep in the eyes, just like, Drew, you have been looking for a change. This is like slap, slap, slap across the face. Like, this would be a pretty cool change, wouldn't it? And I just remember thinking like, oh, yeah, that would be pretty cool. Huh. It's like, how obvious does that have to be before I see it? My goodness. Thank you, love. That is I'm so glad I know someone who knows me better than myself, at least in some ways. So I went into the next time we had that conversation with a little bit more of an open mind. And that's how it shaked out. It's been great.
What's it like going from being in charge of all the things as a CEO to being a part of something that's not yours? It's not your baby. What's that like?
It's awesome. I can say that because I have just very high confidence in the people I work with. And that was really important to me going in. I wanted to make sure there was a clear role for me, that I could see myself making a difference. And also I could see myself having a lot of comfort handing over, knowing that other good people were making good decisions that I would agree with. Maybe not every decision, but I would agree with the decision-making process. And having been a CEO, I'm very aware of the fact that a lot of the decisions you need to make are based on imperfect information and that don't have a clear, the obvious answer is this. I mean, if you only got those questions as a CEO, that there would be something terribly wrong. That would mean that the people who are doing the work didn't have the power to make decisions. Like, basically, the only decisions that would arrive that I needed to make were always the messy ones. Like, all the easy ones were taken care of, and even many of the hard ones were taken care of. It was really only the particularly snarly ones. And so I actually, this is one of the things I enjoy now, is like, I'll hand over a situation, like, hey, I'm going to weigh in. Here's what I think is going on. Here's the things I'm able to see. Here are my recommendations. Enjoy. And I think it's fantastic. I'll leave it there.
Okay. I was actually going to ask you what the best part of your job is right now, but I think you just answered that.
Well, no, I enjoy that freedom, and I enjoy the ability for me to be able to have less emotion and angst perhaps tied up in my work. There are pressures with being responsible for the paychecks of others. And, I'm a manager at Pantheon as well, and I still feel some of those pressures, but it's far less visceral. At the same time, I'm very aware of the fact that one of the things that I learned as a CEO is that all companies are 2 to 3 months from going out of business. Every single one. And we see that. Companies with massive corporate layoffs. We see it doesn't matter what size you are. It's just possible. And, as a services business, what you end up doing is you find a new client. And of course you find a new client because you've always been able to find new clients, but you don't know which client it's going to be. And there's always some, that is a real
angst
and recurring pressure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Pantheon needs to find new clients. It's a product, but we need to continue, doing our work. But not seeing that thing every day is I know it's true. I'm not sort of hit with it every moment, and so I appreciate that. However, if coming back to the thing I like the most, I love the fact that I lead yet another great team. So I have this just really cool team of developer relations folks, and they're all experienced, talented, technical people who have done real work, really interesting stuff elsewhere in the world, Drupal and WordPress, and some other systems as well. And they've done it well enough to get to a certain level of experience and expertise and accolade from people around them. But then they've also got personalities that are just really warm and open and welcoming, and they give talks at different camps, and they make friends with lots of people, and they're just like a just really warm, wonderful group of people. So listeners to the podcast might know, for example, David Needham, who is a Minneapolis ex-resident who lives in Illinois these days, but he's a member of the team. Steve Persh, also in the Drupal scene, used to be from Palantir, lived in Chicago, then Milwaukee. Now he's actually in Minneapolis, actually, in the last few months.
Hi, Steve. We should get Steve. We should get Steve on the podcast.
You absolutely should get Steve on the podcast.
I think that would be great.
Yeah. And then Dwayne, anybody who's ever gone to a Drupal camp has probably met Dwayne. Dwayne is our road warrior. All of us get out on the road. And then we've got Tessa here locally in the community as well. She's a little bit more active in WordPress, but again, just these fantastic people. And Andrew Taylor in Portland these days, again, more visible in the WordPress space. But again, all of these folks have given sessions at DrupalCon. Again, so I love the fact that I work with these great people. What we try to do is cross-pollinate best ideas, best practices, and help others do their jobs better. And yes, we like it if you do Pantheon. Well, use Pantheon as part of that. But we hope that we're spreading best practices like continuous integration and other things like that. People will pick them up and use them however they want, but take the code repo, fork it, find good, make it your own thing, and use it to make your agency more effective. And it's really easy to rep Pantheon because it's a pretty great platform. I really wish Gorton Studios had discovered it. It would have saved us a lot of freaking hassles. Servers are not fun. I used to end up dealing with servers more often than the rest of the team, and so I felt it perhaps a little bit more acutely. But servers suck.
I'd rather someone else did them as well.
Oh man, yeah. So
well, I have to say I'm very impressed with and have always appreciated the amount of contribution and care that Pantheon takes about open sourcing as many of the things that you guys are working on as possible. You mentioned Zach early on, and I remember TEN7 and myself being very interested in Pantheon very early on. And one of the things that struck me was the authenticity that I felt that Pantheon had. And it felt like you guys were the small fish going up against the bigger fish. Yeah. And I think you've been able to swim up that upstream, and I see only good things coming forth from Pantheon. So I'm glad to see that.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that's a great word to describe it. So Zach is incredibly authentic, and so is the rest of the leadership too. It's just all good people who might disagree on the way to do something, but not the why. Right? We want to make life better for our customers. Like, well, okay, good. We all agree. Great. Now, what do we do tomorrow? And to have a team around which you can have a great dialogue on things like that. Again, you might not agree with exactly the outcome, but you also agree, like, look, there's a lot of stuff going on here. We need to make an expedient decision. The decision's made. Let's do it. And that feels great too. All right, we're going to do it. Cool. And now we'll readdress in 6 months if we need to, or whatever. And it's great.
So I want to ask you two more questions. One, well, actually, both of them. I mean, they could be work related or not. It's up to you. What's your favorite thing right now? In the last 24 hours, in the last 40 hours, what's your favorite thing?
I like cooking. So one of the things that I've really discovered over the last 3 to 5 years is the simple joy of providing a good meal for others. Last night, my youngest son, who is a freshman in high school, did his first marching band at the football game. We came home at like 10, 11 o'clock and got home, and he hadn't eaten dinner. And I made him and my other son quesadillas, and I had one myself too, because why not? And we just had like a little time together, and teenage boys that are eating make appreciative noises. It's just a simple joy.
It is. Cherish them while they're there. And my last question before we wrap up, what book should I read next?
So I read a lot of fiction, and I enjoy science fiction and fantasy because nerd. The series that I have most recently just burned through is called The Expanse, which I also have come to learn is a television show. It is an extraordinarily well-written series. The author's name is James Comey.
James Comey, as in the former FBI director?
Could be confounding I think it's Comey. I'm going to Google this up. It is the experience.
I mean, is he moonlighting?
It is. It's not the same guy. I do know that.
Okay. Well, for a moment, I thought he might be moonlighting.
Yeah. Corey. You're right. James Corey.
Corey.
I was confounding two things. So Corey, which happens to be a collaboration of two different authors. But it's set in a not terribly far future in which Mars has been colonized, but is being terraformed, and the asteroid belt is being worked, and it has basically created three distinct sort of civilizations, all humans, and historically all over Earth. But after a few generations living in the outer belt, after a few generations living on Mars, you start to have your own stories and such. And so it's this geopolitical isn't the right word is like solar political or soul political perhaps storytelling or soul political background upon which there's just great storytelling, and into that mix is injected some alien technology, and it's great storytelling, and it's also extraordinarily plausible. It's not so far ahead that you have like imaginary lightsabers or ray guns or other things like that. That you're like, well, I don't really know exactly how that works, but whatever, it's kind of interesting. It feels very authentic, and it also feels, the thing I enjoy about science fiction and fantasy is that it allows you to take, well done science fiction and fantasy allows you to take real people and put them into a different environment, and then basically look how that environment might shape their behaviors in a way that is eye-opening, and that's awesome. So it's an awesome series.
Thank you for the recommendation. We'll definitely link to it in the transcript.
Awesome.
Drew, thank you so much for spending your precious time with me.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed this. I hope I wasn't too long-winded. I think I might have been.
I think you're good. You're good. So you're at D Gorton on Twitter and on Drupal.org, and you're Drew Gorton on SlideShare. That's slideshare.net/Drew Gorton. You've been listening to the TEN7 Podcast. Find us online at ten7.com/podcast. And if you have a second, do send us a message. We love hearing from you. Our email address is podcast@ten7.com. Until next time, this is Ivan Stegic. Thank you for listening.